Well, hello everybody and welcome to another episode, and today I'm going to show you 5 wide-angle vintage lenses with focal lengths of 40mm, 28mm, 24mm and 20mm. They're all 70s or 80s lenses with the exception of one which is a 1950s lens. They're all affordable, priced from around about £10 up to around about £150 at the top end, and they're all really nice too, apart from one which is horrible, but more on that later. So we've got a fairly eclectic mix of focal lengths today, and while they all will shoot a wide image on full frame cameras, they also give, or some of them also give, very useful focal length equivalents for crop sensor bodies. So if you're shooting aps-c or micro four thirds, then stay tuned. We'll talk about that too. I think it's really useful for a photographer to have experience with a wide angle lens. They have a different character, an entirely different aesthetic to longer lenses. They make an entirely different type of image, and they will force you to develop your photographic style. Now, a good way to study the use of wides is to watch film and TV. Not older TV of the 50s, 60s, 70s, that tended to be shot quite close, but TV of the last 10 years, which has become more cinematic. Wides are used a great deal in film and television production, and if you want a show to look at to really study the use of wides and to look at some beautiful cinematography and loads of wide angle shots, have a look at Breaking Bad. That's a really, really good show for instructing yourself on the use of wide angle lenses. Some extraordinary cinematography in that show. To make images though, you're going to need a lens first. So let's have a look at the glass. And the first lens we're going to have a look at today is almost not a wide at all. It's very near to the so-called standard focal length of 50mm, but the 10mm does make a difference. This is the Konica Hexanon AR 40mm f1.8, and this is most certainly not the horrible lens. In fact, this is one of my favourite lenses. There are 2 reasons for that. Firstly, it's because it's a 40mm lens, and 40mm lenses just have, for me, the perfect focal length to use on the street. I don't know what it is about it. There's just something right with a 40mm lens or a 40mm equivalent lens on the front of my camera. I don't know, something happens, some alchemical transformation happens, and I don't know, I just seem to become a better photographer. Suddenly everything seems to come together and suddenly everything seems right, and it's that 40mm focal length that does it. I'll take you in for a closer look at this lens. So there's the Hexanon 40mm f1.8, and this is a really, really nicely made lens, and it makes some very, very nice images indeed. I think it's all metal. There might be 1 or 2 plastic bits used in its construction, but I think this one's all metal. The Hexanon line of lenses were the better line of Konica lenses. I think they also made a slightly lesser line called the Hexar, but the Hexanon really is the one you want. They are the nicest lenses and they give the nicest images. Konica lenses are really well known for the colours they make, and this one makes beautiful colours that really pop. I've never quite seen colours like this from a lens. They're very unique to Konica, and those colours together with that really fantastic focal length of 40mm just make this into a lens that I think everybody should have. This is absolutely one of my favourite lenses. It just seems to work on the street. It's a fantastic performer. It makes images like very few other lenses can. I've said that before, but this one is just so nice. It's got great contrast, great colour, very strong saturation, and it's a very sharp lens too. Even wide open, you can shoot this lens all day long, f1.8, and you'll never think, gosh, that really isn't a sharp lens at all. In fact, you'll probably think quite the reverse. This one does stand out for its sharpness. It's a real little gem of a lens, and I just love it whenever I use it. And it's cheap as well. This lens is available for around £40 to £60, and sometimes you can even get it on the front of a camera for around that price too, like I did with this Konica, I don't know what model this is, FS1, Konica FS1. So you might be lucky and be able to find a lens that you can, or rather that is already sitting on a camera body, so you'll have a nice film SLR to shoot it on as well. I think this Konica 40 is very, very nearly as nice as the Voigtlander 40mm lens made for Leica M-mount cameras, which is a much more expensive lens. I think that one comes in at about £400-500 or thereabouts. This one, £40 to £60, and it really is within an ace of that more expensive lens. Put two images together made by those lenses, and you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference. You just can't go wrong with this lens. So my advice is, if you see one, grab it. I really don't think you'll regret it. So I do love that 40mm focal length. It just seems to make some sort of magic happen. But what's your favourite focal length shooting wide angle? Let me know in the comments box below if you've got a favourite. If you prefer 28mm, for example. If you prefer a super wide, for example. If you like to make twisty lines and straight lines bend with fisheyes, let me know in the comments box below what are your favourite wide angle focal lengths. And so on to the next lens. Well, the next lens is not the horrible lens either. In fact, this is a really lovely, nice one. This is the Canon FD 28mm 2.8, and I really love the Canon FD lenses. They give a clear, light and bright images, and there really is a clarity and a brightness about the images that they make. They really do put that certain stamp on their images. They've got great contrast, they've got great colour, they've got great sharpness. I'm not keen on the 70 to 210 zoom, but that's the only one I've really had a problem with. The others I've used have all been excellent, and this one is no exception. Let's just have a closer look at this one. So there's our little FD lens, and I say little, but actually this 28mm is a little bit longer than most vintage 28s, which tend to be a bit narrower, and it does get slightly longer as you turn the focus ring throughout its range. It does have a pretty short focus throw of about a third of a turn. It's really not much at all. It has a minimum focus distance of 30 centimeters, and that's really useful. These Canon lenses tend to have a more modern rendering than some other vintage lenses, but they still retain that vintage character, so you kind of get the best of both worlds with these lenses. I think they do have a clarity, they do have a brightness, they do have a modernity to their image, but they also have a classic feel as well. They can also put an unusual stamp on an image. These are beautiful lenses, as I say, and they tend to be cheaper than a lot of other vintage lenses too, and I'm really not sure why that is. It might be because there is some plastic used in their construction, whereas most of the other vintage lenses tend to be all metal or nearly all metal. Certainly the ones from the major brands anyway. So there is a little bit of plastic used in its construction, but that's no bad thing, and it also means it's a little bit lighter as well. Another reason why maybe these lenses are a bit cheaper is because they can be a little tricky to put on an adapter. There's a lever on the back here that you have to make sure is hooked around a pin on the adapter before you actually turn it and mount it on the lens. So it's this pin here. I'll just quickly show you. Yeah, so it's this pin here. That pin needs to be behind the relevant bit on the adapter before you actually twist on the lens, but that comes with practice. And I've used these lenses, well, I've used them loads actually, and made some really beautiful images with them on the Sony A7. Very, very fine lenses indeed, and rather cheaper than most vintage lenses too. Now, wide lenses like this are just made for zone focusing. They make it really, really easy. If you set your aperture to, gosh, I don't know, f5.6 or f8, and you've got reasonably good light and a reasonably high ISO level, then you know you're going to get a very, very deep depth of field, and that's one area where these wide lenses really do score. And also because of the crop factor on aps-c, if you use one of these lenses, a 28mm on an aps-c camera, it gives a focal length equivalent of, that is a full frame equivalent of 42mm. Yes, mount one of these on an aps-c body or any 28mm lens and it will give you 42mm, which is very, very close to my ideal street length. So if you've got an aps-c body and you want a 40mm lens, this could be a really good answer for you, any vintage 28mm. So this is a great little lens. It will cost you around £30 to £40 or thereabouts, possibly a little more or less expensive, but in that ballpark area, and for that price you absolutely cannot go wrong. Great little lens. Grab one if you see one. If you're shooting micro four thirds, your options for vintage lenses that give a 40mm equivalent are rather limited. You'll need a 20mm vintage lens because there's a crop factor of 2 on micro four thirds bodies. But lenses wider than 28mm get very expensive very quickly. But there is a solution, and it's this. It's the Zeiss Jena Flektogon 20mm f4, and this really is quite a lens. Let's just have a look at this beast. I'll take it off the adapter. Now look at that. Is that not a lens among lenses? It's got a beautiful big front element there with those lovely Zeiss Jena coatings on it. It's a very unusual tapered shape. The lens gets thinner as you go along its length. I guess the elements get smaller. So we've got this giant front element here and a very tiny little element right at the back here to bring all that light in and squish it down into a big wide image. Really quite a beautiful lens. This one's in Exacta mount, but they're available in M42 mount as well. I always think the Exacta mount lenses have a beautiful mechanical, extra sort of mechanical feel that some of the others perhaps don't. Well, now, shot on full frame, this is a 20mm lens. On an aps-c camera, it gives a full frame equivalent of a 30mm lens. And on micro four thirds bodies, it gives a full frame equivalent of a 40mm lens. So this is a really good option if you're a micro four thirds shooter and you want to shoot at 40mm with a vintage lens. This one will do the job for you. But however you want to use it, this is a very, oh, hello cat, There's Zorky. What do you want, Zorks? Come and join us, come on. No, Zorky doesn't want to join us. Anyway, this is a very, very special lens. It's corrected for curvature, so usually the wider you go, you get a lot of very wide angle lenses that will distort the image they make. They'll take a straight line and it will end up curved, and the wider the lens is, the more curvature you're going to get on that image, and that can be a lot of fun, but it's not a lot of fun if you want to take an accurate representation of what's in front of you rather than a slightly kooky representation of what's in front of you. With this lens, there is no bending of the lines that you often get with very wide lenses. Everything stays straight, so it's brilliant for architectural photography. It's good for any application where you need a wide field of view and you need those lines to stay absolutely straight. This one will do it for you. This is a lens that has fantastic colour. Carl Zeiss Jena lenses are well known for the beautiful colour representation that they make. This one is no exception. It makes stunning colours, vibrant, alive, punchy, plenty of pop, absolutely fantastic colours from this lens, and in fact the Carl Zeiss Jena lenses in general are some of the nicest for colour that I know. It's got very good contrast as well, but this one has led a hard life, and I don't know if you can see on here, it does have some fine scratches on the surface there which will lower the contrast. I'm looking at ways to repair it, but you know, this one is not in the absolute best of condition, so I'm really looking at trying to maybe recoat this lens in the long term, but it is a long term repair job. Suffice to say, one of these in good condition, which this one isn't in the peak of, but one in good condition will make you absolutely outstanding images. And even though this one has led a hard life, it still makes some pretty nice images and its character still shines through. Rather a special lens. I paid £50 for this slightly sorry example, but £150 will buy a nice one. It's a very cheap way into very wide curvature corrected lens ownership, and it's also a jolly good way into 40mm shooting for micro four thirds. Absolutely beautiful lens. Grab one if you can. Right, what's next? I'll tell you what's next. What's next is the Pentax SMC Super Multi-Coat Pentax f2.8 28mm, and this is a genuinely beautiful little lens. It's a very unassuming little thing. It really isn't much to look at. If you compare it to an Olympus lens, it really doesn't look that much at all. If you compare it to a Cosina lens or a Chinon lens, it can even look less good, but that's just looks. Let's go in for a closer look to show you what I mean. So it really is a fairly humble looking little thing. It's got all the relevant information on here. There's a little cutout for the focusing distance. We've got various colours for the various symbols, colour-coded information. So it's not much to look at all. The focus throw is again pretty short, about 1/3 of a turn, and it extends just a little way out when you turn it. However, when we look at the glass, we can see there those exquisite, fantastic and beautiful Pentax coatings and glass, and that is where the magic happens, because this lens is a very special little thing and it makes some very special little images. So although it's a bit of a plain Jane to look at, looks can be deceiving, Pentax glass and coatings are second to none. They give very strong contrast, sharpness and colour with the unique, just incredible pastel-y Pentax colours, and I've never seen colours like Pentax lenses give. They have a very unusual stamp and a very clear house style right across their lens range. Colours are, it's hard to explain. They're a little bit subdued in a way, but they're also quite deep. They have a lot of depth, they have a lot of punch, they have a lot of kick and pop, but they also have this pastel-y quality which marks them out as just that little bit different to the rendering of any other vintage lens, certainly that I've used anyway. And it's a very nice signature, and it will make some very beautiful images. This lens has an outstanding build quality. Pentax lenses by some are said to be the best constructed lens in the world, and you know, they compare them to any other lens and they certainly stand up. They stand the test of time. There's no play in any of the bearing surfaces or the controls. Everything's nice and smooth even after all these years, and I think that quite a few of these Pentax lenses have lived very hard lives, but they seem to stand up to the wear and tear really well, and perhaps a little better actually than some other lenses. So no fears on quality of manufacture with these Pentax lenses. Most of them are a good, safe bet, even in their advanced years. It's a great 28mm for full frame cameras, and it really is hard to beat this one, and it makes a really nice 40mm for aps-c cameras. Not expensive, between £40 to £70 for a good one. Again, you can often find them on the front of cameras for the same price range or less, and that's probably the cheapest way to buy. But if you're looking for a really good wide 28mm and you see one of these, my advice is buy it. You won't regret it. Okay, you've made it this far. Well done. And you deserve to know which is the horrible lens, so I'll show you. It's this one. It's the Miranda 24mm f2.8 MC macro. Well, it does say macro on it, but I think those claims may be exaggerated. This is the horrible lens, and when I say horrible, I mean it'll make you some images, it'll make you some reasonably nice images, but it's very soft at the edges if you shoot it wide open. And don't forget, this is a wide lens, and wide lenses have inherent sharpness over longer lenses. So this lens should be sharp. It's a 24mm, but it's not. It does have some softness at the edges, and it's not particularly sharp in the center either. It does get nicer if you stop it down to f5.6 or so. So it's not a completely awful thing, and we shouldn't expect too much of a fairly humble lens. This was a fairly humble lens in its day, and it's not pretending to be anything other than that. So it is what it is, but what it is just not, quite as good as some of its big brand name rivals. Now, I wanted this lens to work nicely. I really did. I wanted this lens to be a miracle. I wanted the underdog to triumph, because that's kind of what xenography is about, really, is taking older equipment that nobody really wants, or at least didn't really want when I started the channel, all the old film gear, and giving it a new lease of life. So I really wanted this little underdog to triumph and come out on top, and for me to be able to say, yeah, I found this really cool lens for next to nothing. Sadly, it didn't work out that way. The underdog has not triumphed, and it's the underdog for a reason. So why include it? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because of the focal length. On full frame bodies, this 24mm lens will give a focal length of 24mm, which is very usable, a very wide focal length. But on aps-c, it gives an effective focal length of 36mm, which makes it pretty much a 35mm equivalent lens, and that's why it's included. If you want a vintage 35mm equivalent, find a vintage 24mm lens. Let's just have a closer look at this one, just because we can. And so there is the little Miranda 24mm. It's a fairly largish lens. I think it's a similar size, broadly speaking, to the Canon lens that we've looked at already. Does that seem about similar? I think it is broadly similar, isn't it? Or it would be if we could have some focus. Yeah, so I think those are of broadly similar dimensions. Of course, the Canon lens is a much nicer lens, and I have to say, though, that given the price I paid for it, which was, I think, about £5 or £10, some very small figure like that, given the price I paid for it, it's actually not a bad lens. It does make some images that are reasonably nice. You can stop it down to sharpen it up, and if you're in a pinch and you need a 24mm, this will fit the bill and it will do the job. But to get sharpness out of it, you will have to stop it down. Also, I'm not too keen on the colours that come out of this lens. They seem a little drab and a little dull and somehow lacking in that pop. There might be a little bit of haze in the lens that's dragging those colours down, but I can't see any. I think that's actually an inherent quality of the lens. So it's not the best lens for colour, but even so, it will shoot some pretty nice black and whites. Now, there are lots of vintage 24mm lenses around, and if you want a 35mm equivalent vintage lens for your aps-c body, this is the focal length you need, 24mm, and you should be able to find a nice 24mm lens by one of the main brand manufacturers for around £100 or less. Just don't get this one, because it's really not that great. So, 4 fantastic lenses and one that is distinctly less than fantastic. They'll all make you some very nice images. They'll all shoot you a wide image on full frame bodies, and they'll also shoot some very useful full frame equivalent focal lengths on crop sensor bodies, that is aps-c and micro four thirds. So that's it from me for today. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and ring that jolly old bell thing before you go. And if you like the content on this channel and you'd like to help it grow and develop, you'd like to support it, you can do that at patreon.com/Zonography, and you can do that for as little as $1 per month. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time for some more Zonography.